The house on Spruce Street was known as the Pink Palace. It was home to the Delta Zeta Chi, or DZX, sorority, the most prestigious and, some whispered, the most cliquish sisterhood on the Briarwood University campus. In the autumn of 2015, the Pink Palace went silent. It wasn't a gradual emptying, it was a vacuum. One Tuesday morning, a delivery driver found the front door ajar. Inside, the scene was one of suspended life. Half-eaten breakfasts, laptops open to assignment pages, and 23 neatly made beds with no trace of their occupants. 23 young women, the entire active roster of DZX, had vanished overnight. The disappearance became a national sensation. Local police, then the FBI, swarmed Briarwood. They scoured the campus, dragged the nearby Blackwood River, and interviewed every student, professor, and custodian. The media descended, broadcasting images of the smiling, bright-eyed sisters. Theories ran wild: a mass kidnapping, a cold suicide pact, or an elaborate coordinated runaway effort. The only physical evidence was baffling. In the basement, a single, perfectly smooth, obsidian-like stone was found on the floor near the laundry room, cold to the touch. It was dismissed as a geological curiosity. The only other anomaly was the final group text message sent on the sorority's main thread at 11:47 p.m. the night of the disappearance. It was the chapter president, Clara Vance. "Clara, it's working. We are ready." Then nothing. The case went cold. The Pink Palace was boarded up, a macabre monument to the unknown, its pink facade fading under 5 years of rain and sun. 5 years later, the reopening. Detective Marcus Thorne had been a rookie on the original case, haunted by the smiling faces he had posted on his missing persons board. Now, a grizzled veteran, Thorne received a call that reopened the sorority case. A new construction crew tasked with renovating an old, condemned fraternity house, Sigma Tau Omega, or STO, 2 blocks from the Pink Palace, had found something inside the sealed-off attic: a hidden diary. The diary belonged to Jeremy Wells, an STO pledge, who had died in a suspected drug overdose a month before the Delta Zeta Chi sisters vanished. The STO house was condemned immediately after Jeremy's death, and its secrets left untouched. Thorne read the frantic coded entries in Jeremy's diary. They detailed a terrifying secret ritual practiced by the DZX sisters. It wasn't about grades or charity. It was about power. Jeremy wrote about clandestine meetings between the DZX sisters and the senior members of STO, who were known for their arrogance and occult interests. The sorority wasn't cliquish. It was exclusive because the sisters were involved in something they called the transaction.
The disturbing secret. The ritual, detailed in Jeremy's final, shaking entries, was based on an ancient, corrupted interpretation of astrological magic. The sisters believed that a coordinated collective sacrifice of their future, their hopes, their dreams, their very potential, could grant them immense power in the present. The transaction required 2 things: a vessel and a catalyst. The catalyst: the 23 sisters needed to be in perfect collective agreement, channeling their life force at the exact moment of a specific astrological alignment. The vessel: they needed an unwitting sacrifice, someone whose potential was about to peak and whose future could be siphoned off. Jeremy Wells, a brilliant astrophysics major who was on the cusp of an incredible internship, was chosen by the STO seniors for this purpose. They had given him a drug-laced drink, faking his overdose, and used his last moments of life energy as the fuel for the DCX ritual. The girls had succeeded in the transaction, but the diary didn't explain where they went. It only explained why they had vanished. They hadn't been kidnapped or run away. They had ascended. The revelation in the Pink Palace. Thorne raced back to the Pink Palace. He found the old FBI case files detailing the basement evidence, the single obsidian stone. The new evidence from the diary now gave it meaning. He ordered a team to demolish the basement wall behind where the stone was found. Behind the drywall, they didn't find bones. They found the chamber, a small circular room lined with the same smooth black obsidian rock, covered in faint glowing sigils that pulsed faintly. And there in the center of the chamber were the Delta Zeta Chi sisters. They were not dead, but they were not exactly alive either. The 23 women were suspended, frozen in midair, a few feet above the ground. They were physically untouched, perfectly preserved, but their eyes were solid, milky white, and completely vacant. They were wearing immense white robes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. As Thorne and his team stared, the air in the chamber grew impossibly cold. A low, collective hum began to emanate from the sisters. It was the sound of 23 minds working as one, focused on a singular, unstoppable goal. They had achieved what they sought. They had traded their human lions for a form of power, becoming living conduits. Tied to a planar power source beneath the house, the Pink Palace was now an occult battery. The vanished sisters had become the guardians of a doorway, an eternal sentry, and to keep the power locked away, lest it fall into the wrong hands, or more terrifyingly, to keep the thing that they had contacted from coming through. Thorne realized the terrifying truth. The girls had sacrificed themselves to keep the great power, or the great horror they had contacted, from entering the world. Clara's final text message, "It's working, we are ready," hadn't been a sign of their ascent. It was a sign of their sealing. As Thorne backed out of the chamber, the humming intensified, shaking the very foundation of the house. He knew he could never unseal the chamber. The sorority sisters, once symbols of privilege and vanity, had become eternal silent sentinels, and the secret they were guarding was far too vast and disturbing to ever be uncovered by the world outside. The Pink Palace was resealed. The public was told the sisters' bodies were found. An airtight, fabricated story of a sudden carbon monoxide leak was released.
Detective Thorne, however, knew the truth. He often drove past Spruce Street, watching the old house. The pink paint was peeling, but sometimes, on the darkest nights, he could swear he saw a faint milky white glow emanating from the basement window. The eternal, vacant eyes of the Delta Zeta Chi sisters, the living secret of the Briarwood campus. The unspoken truth. Briarwood, 1 year later, 2021. Detective Marcus Thorne had managed to bury the truth about the Pink Palace under layers of bureaucratic red tape and a convincingly fake carbon monoxide disaster report. The local news ran a solemn piece on the tragic cold case conclusion, and for a brief month, life at Briarwood University returned to a fragile state of normalcy. But secrets, especially those infused with dark magic, rarely stayed dormant. Thorne was plagued by the knowledge of what lay beneath 120 Spruce Street. The official story had been accepted, but the students, young, internet-savvy, and perpetually drawn to campus legends, were not convinced. The Pink Palace quickly became the subject of creepypasta forums and viral TikTok theories. They called it the Silent Sentinels. The new pledge class. The following fall, a new group of students arrived. Among them was Ilara Vance, the younger sister of Clara Vance, the DZGG Sipsicider Skepsenserf, the STO Schützentity, and the bizarre suicide of Jeremy Wells. She found an encrypted file that had been copied from Jeremy's laptop before the police seized it. It wasn't the diary. It was a blueprint. The architect's key. The blueprint Ilara found was a highly detailed, hand-drawn schematic of the entire Briarwood campus, but with subtle and possible additions. It wasn't a civil engineering plan. It was a map of power.
It showed ley lines crossing beneath the central quad and converging at a single nexus point, the Ping Palace basement. Crucially, the blueprint had a legend detailing of the purpose of the succession. It wasn't just to acquire power. It was to stabilize the rift. Jeremy's notes explained the Sorority group wasn't trying to open a door, they were trying to close one. A crack had formed in the fabric of reality beneath this, leaking a chaotic influence into the world. The same influence that had led to STO's more depraved activities and was responsible for the high rate of student anxiety, depression, and unexplained violence over the past decade. The sacrifice of the sisters' heretic potential, channeled through this life force of Jeremy Wells, was the only way to create a massive psychotic answer. The 23 sisters serving as living locks to keep the rift sealed. Ilara realized that her sister and the other SCT were not villains. They were martyrs.
The leak. As Ilara prepared to break into the Pink Palace basement to somehow communicate with or free her sister, Detective Thorne was dealing with a new problem. The sealed chamber was no longer holding steady. Thorne had dismissed the strange phenomena at the Pink Palace as structural settling, but the tremors were getting worse. A geology survey he secretly commissioned reported impossible data. The ground beneath the house was experiencing localized negative gravitational pull. The force of the sealed rift was growing stronger. One rainy Tuesday night, a small black object materialized in the middle of the quad, the obsidian stone identical to the one found 5 years prior. This one was covered in a slick, dark residue. It was a fragment of the chamber, violently ejected. When Thorne examined the stone, he realized the hum he had heard from the sisters was changing pitch. It was no longer a steady, unified drone. It was frantic, discordant. The sentinels were failing. The catastrophe. As Ilara, following the tremors, arrived at the Pink Palace moments before Thorne, she used a maintenance key she'd stolen from a facility worker to get inside. In the basement, the wall to the sealed chamber was splintered, leaking an eerie, purplish light. She saw her sister, Clara, and the other 22 women. Their white robes were now shredded, and the milky white glow in their eyes was sputtering, like a failing light bulb. Their unified power was cracking. As Ilaris kept toward them, she heard a voice, her sister's, but not quite her sister's, a dry, echoing whisper that filled the chamber. The bargain is broken, Ilara. There is no time. The price must be paid again. Before Ilara could react, the ground beneath the sorority house sheared, the entire basement chamber, the sisters, the obsidian rolls, the rift collapsed into a void of pure darkness. The vacuum pulled at the foundation, and the Pink Palace, with the 23 sisters and Ilara still inside, was consumed. Thorne arrived just as the house vanished, leaving behind only a perfectly circular, perpetually humming void in the earth where the sorority house had stood. The secret was out. The guardians had failed. The rift was now open, and in the silence that followed, a new sound echoed across the Briarwood campus, a sound that hadn't been heard in 5 years. The distant, arrogant laughter of a new pledge class, ready to claim the now empty, power-filled ground for their own. The cycle was about to begin again, but this time the entities waiting on the other side of the void were ready to help them build their new house. This is where the true horror begins. I'll continue the story, focusing on Detective Thorne's desperate struggle to contain the catastrophe and the immediate, terrifying effects of the open rift on Briarwood University.
Detective Marcus Thorne didn't wait for backup. He stumbled to the edge of the circular void where the Pink Palace had been. The pit was impossibly deep, its darkness absolute, and the faint, low hum, the sound of the open rift, vibrated through his bones. He knew that he couldn't call the FBI. How do you report a missing house, a vanished girl, and a collapsed circle of ground that hums with otherworldly power? The police report and the quake. Thorne quickly fabricated a catastrophic gas explosion. He sealed off Spruce Street, citing structural instability. The media swallowed the story, focusing on the miraculous absence of casualties, unaware the void had claimed 24 people, 23 sentinels, and one brave sister. Within a week, the circular scar left by the collapse became known as the Scar by the remaining students. The university quickly fenced it off, intending to fill it, but every time a truckload of earth was poured into the scar, the low hum would intensify, the ground would tremble, and the earth would be violently ejected overnight, scattering soil for hundreds of yards. The scar refused to be covered. The influence. The open rift wasn't a sudden explosion of monsters. It was a slow, insidious poison. The chaotic influence that the DZX sisters had worked so hard to seal began to leak out, twisting reality just slightly around the edges of the Briarwood campus. Number 1. Impossible architecture. Buildings shifted. Students began to report that certain hallways in the main library will be longer one day than the next. The bell tower, a campus landmark, began to cast 2 shadows at noon. Number 2. Collective madness. The low hum of the scar began to affect the student body. The anxiety that Jeremy Wells' notes mentioned escalated into a collective, frenzied energy. There were spontaneous, violent outbursts in lecture halls, an epidemic of sleepwalking, and strange, ritualistic graffiti appearing on dorm walls, not the ancient sigils from the chamber, but new, feverishly drawn geometric shapes. Number 3. The new STO. A new, highly exclusive and unnervingly organized group emerged. They didn't call themselves Sigma Chi Omega, but simply the Core. They were instantly popular, charismatic, and chillingly uniform. They wore dark-colored clothes, moved in synchronized clusters, and all seemed to share the same unsettlingly bright, vacant gaze. The same days Thorne had seen on the suspended DZX sisters.
Thorne's discovery. Thorne broke into the abandoned and condemned STO house one last time, driven by a nagging suspicion. Jeremy Wells's diary was the key, but Ilara Vance had mentioned a blueprint. He found it taped inside the hollowed-out spine of an old textbook. It wasn't just a map of power. It was a diagram for a resonator. The blueprint showed that the scar was merely the anchor point for the rift. The full-scale physical manifestation required a network. The DZX sisters had created the anchor, but the original STO band required 4 other secondary nodes, 4 other ritual sites, to create a fully stable two-way gate. Thorne realized with sickening clarity that the new group, the Core, weren't trying to close the rift. They were trying to complete the circuit. He watched them from a distance one night. They gathered at one of the map node points, the campus sculptural garden. As the Core stood there silent and still, the shadows of the abstract metal sculptures began to stretch, lengthen, and move toward them, acting less like shadows and more like tendrils feeding them energy. The Core was finishing where the original STO started, but with a terrifying evolution. They were using the sheer, unfiltered chaos of the open rift to gain influence and control over the student body, suddenly turning Briarwood into a breeding ground for whatever entity now looked through the open gate. The confrontation. Thorne couldn't wait any longer. He cornered the leader of the Core, a philosophy major named Caleb, known for his unsettling calm and persuasive voice. Thorne showed him the blueprint. Caleb merely smiled, his eyes holding that vacant, focused intensity. "You don't understand, Detective," Caleb said, his voice a smooth, low register that seemed to vibrate with the hum of the scar. "The old sisters tried to lock it. We learned how to welcome it. They lost their potential for a brief moment of power. We are trading our will for an eternity of control." "What did you do with the remaining nodes?" Thorne demanded, clipping his service weapon. Caleb gestured casually toward the campus. We didn't need to build them, Detective. Briarwood is a place of endless possibility, endless future. We just needed to find 4 new, untapped wells of potential. 4 people eager to sacrifice themselves for a common good. It's the same transaction, only this time the price isn't life. It's sanity. Caleb pointed to the Student Union building, where the annual Future Leaders of Briarwood ceremony was taking place. 4 students, the 4 brightest minds, the 4 most eager idealists were receiving their awards. The circuit is closed, Caleb whispered, his smile widening into something genuinely monstrous. Look up, Detective. Thorne followed Caleb's gaze. High above the campus, the atmosphere shimmered. The clouds parted, not for the sun, but for a single, colossal, impossibly large, perfectly smooth black sphere, an impossibly large version of the obsidian stone that was now visible in the upper atmosphere. The moment it appeared, the low hum from the scar intensified into a deafening, reality-splitting screech. Briarwood University was no longer an anchor for the rift. It was now an entry point.
The screech of the rift's final opening was a physical blow, silencing the city for a second before the chaos began. The colossal black sphere hung in the sky, not reflecting light, but absorbing it, marking the moment Briarwood ceased to be an ordinary college town. Detective Thorne didn't hesitate. He knew the source of the evil was the scar, but the immediate threat was the 4 new conduits, the unwitting future leaders. The Union Hall frenzy. Thorne burst into the student union's gala. The ceremony was collapsing into pandemonium. The hum of the scar, amplified by the 4 conduits' freshly tapped potential, was now a constant low-frequency pressure on the human mind. Students weren't rioting. They were undergoing a collective fugue state. The floor was slick with spilled drinks and sweat. Dozens of students were rocking back and forth, chanting the geometric symbols that adorned the campus walls. The core members, including Caleb, stood scattered among the crowd, their vacant eyes now burning with a cold, pale light, watching their influence spread like a virus. At the center stood the 4 conduits. Sarah, the engineering whiz, was tracing impossible calculations on the nearest wall with a shaking finger. Then the political science major was delivering a passionate, nonsensical speech about sacrificing the past for the greater geometry. Maria, the pre-med student, was repeating medical terms backwards, smiling serenely. And Josh, the literature scholar, was standing still, his tears carving tracks through the sweat on his face. He was the only one fighting the influence. "They're the nodes," Thorne shouted, trying to reach them through the psychic din. "They're holding the gate open." Caleb stepped into Thorne's path, his composure absolute. "You can't save them, Detective. You can only join them. They are achieving perfect resonance with the higher sphere. Their potential is now infinite, and their suffering is a momentary tremor." The unmaking. Thorne bypassed Caleb, driven by the memory of a lot of Vans and the 23 sealed sisters. The transaction wasn't about power. It was about transferring the chaotic influence from the rift into a human mind until that mind shattered, turning the person into a living, screaming receiver for the entity above. He reached Josh first. The hum was deafening near him. "Josh, you have to break the circuit. Think of something real, something unwavering," Thorne yelled, grabbing the student's shoulders. Josh's eyes snapped to Thorne's. It shows me the end of everything," he choked out with a cracking voice. "It shows me a perfect truth that destroys all meaning." Thorne realized he couldn't just snap them out of it. He had to replace the resonance. He pulled out the final piece of evidence he had kept, the single, smooth obsidian fragment ejected from the Pink Palace.
It was cool, dark, and still held the faint dying energy that is Zack's sister's final sealing ritual. Thorn forced the stone into Josh's hand. The moment skin touched stone, he screamed, the sound of searing pain followed by an intense cold that pushed the chanting students back. The obsidian fragment, imbued with the counter-magic of the steeled sentinels, momentarily disrupted the chaotic flow. Josh collapsed, unconscious, the madness draining from him like water.
The retreat. Caleb let out a sound of pure rage, his pale eyes flickering. You interfere with the inevitable. The will of the sphere is absolute. The members of the Corps moved as one, their bodies twitching slightly in synchronization with the hum. Thorn managed to use the obsidian fragment on Maria, touching it to her forehead. She dropped, mercifully silent. But Caleb was ready. He snapped his fingers, and the surrounding students, now fully under the influence, turned into a hostile mob, their eyes vacant, their movements jerky and unnaturally strong. Thorn grabbed the two unconscious conduits, Sarah and Maria, and managed to haul them out a side door, leaving Ben and the frenzied, chanting crowd in the Union Hall. Caleb and the Corps didn't pursue him. They had what they needed. 2 remaining live nodes. The circuit was still partially closed. The lingering darkness. Thorn drove the 2 unconscious students to a secure underground police lockup, the only place he felt safe from the chaos that had consumed the city. The black sphere hung perpetually in the sky, now visible even through the deepest cloud cover. It was causing erratic weather, sudden violent downpours mixed with unnaturally bright focus beams and sunlight. Briarwood was now an island of unreason in the middle of the world. The police force had dissolved into terrified, ineffective units, either succumbing to the hum or abandoning their posts. Thorn knew he had only slowed the inevitable. He had 2 unconscious hostages and 2 active conduits, Ben and Sarah, still feeding the growing horror. He looked at the small, black obsidian stone in his hand. It was faintly worn now, its counter-magic rapidly depleting. He had to find a way to amplify its sealing power, or the price of the system's original sacrifice would be paid not just by 4 students, but the entire world. He needed a place with immense, untapped potential, a place that could channel the anti-chaotic energy of the Sentinel's final act. He looked at the last remaining map on his cruiser dashboard, the blueprint Elara Vance had found detailing the layout of the campus. Where was the only place left on campus that was untouched by the sphere's influence, the place that held the greatest untapped future? The Briarwood University Archives and Library Annex, a vault filled with the unread, unshared knowledge and potential for thousands of untold futures. That's where he had to take his final stand.